To begin, I've always found the late 18th century to be a more confusing period of U.S. history, as well as an area of history that isn't as big a part of modern academic curriculum as I believe it should be. In today's curriculum, I feel that U.S. Reconstruction as well as the U.S. Progressive Era are reviewed over and over, while that time frame in between leading us into the Progressive Era felt almost neglected academically. For this reason, I have chosen to research this period of time using three disastrous events to explain the urban disorder occurring at this time, as well as to show the change in American viewpoint eventually leading us into progression. These events include the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, the Haymarket Affairs of 1886, and the Pullman Strike of 1894. Although these events vary from each other and highlight different areas of urban disorder, these events were all similar in that they each brought this idea of urban disorder to the public eye, changing the way Americans viewed society. This change in thought would eventually evoke the change needed to occur to bring the United States into its progressive era. The first source that I want to highlight is historian Carl Smith's recent monograph, Urban Disorder in the Shape of Belief: The Great Chicago Fire, the Haymarket Bomb, and the Model Town of Pullman. This is the source that I chose for my book review, and overall, this source has been the most beneficial to my research on this assignment. Much like my thesis, Carl Smith uses these various events in Chicago to summarize this time period, as well as to explain the change brought forth in societal view of urban disorder at this time. In company with this, I've also chosen three various academic journal sources, including the 1871 Chicago Fire by Ken Brownlee, the Haymarket Bomb: Reassessing the Evidence, which is a peer-reviewed article by Timothy Cruz, James O. Eckert, Burkle Panee, and Jeffrey Dunn, and finally Cheryl Hudson's The Un-American Experiment: Jane Addams, Lessons from Pullman. Overall, each of these sources help give me a more in-depth understanding of each of the various events I've been researching, as each of these sources are more specific and detailed to each event compared to the book, which covers all three of the events as one. Alongside these sources, I have chosen these two primary source photographs depicting the city of Chicago both before and after the Great Chicago Fire. The painting on my left is a depiction of the city of Chicago prior to the fire. I found this painting to be extremely beneficial to my research as it gave me a very visual understanding of architectural flaws in cities at this time. With this image, you can see that many of the buildings were extremely clustered together, and as we already know at this time, they were primarily made out of wooden material, which made the entire city very easily flammable. The photograph on my right is a primary source photo showing some of the aftermath of the Chicago Fire. This photo helped me visualize how tragic and devastating this event really was. For this assignment, as I am a history education major, I have chosen to prepare an academic outline regarding this time frame and these events. Overall, I plan to one day teach high school level courses, which to me means that each student should already have a basic understanding of U.S. Reconstruction and U.S. progression, making this a very viable time period to talk about in class. I feel that for a high school student, this could be a very beneficial area to talk about, as it can help create a timeline of events and tie other areas of history together. Overall, I feel that this subject would fit almost perfectly into a 10-day lesson plan, which would ensure that each event is very thoroughly explained in class, although this might not actually ever take place in a high school lesson plan. Nonetheless, with these 10 days, I plan on spending 2 days to talk about each subject specifically, and then using the remainder of the days to talk about all the events and using them to explain the whole timeline and the change brought forth as a result of all of them. To begin, I'll use the first day to summarize the Chicago Fire, and then use the second day to then explain the results and effects that this event caused. Following this pattern, the third and fourth day would then revolve around the Haymarket Affairs, summarizing the event on the first day and then using the second day to then explain the results and effects. Much like these two, I will then use days 5 and 6 to get through the Pullman Company and the Pullman Strike of 1894. After defining and explaining each event, I will then spend the next 2 days, days 7 and 8, to explain the relation these three events had with each other and how together change was eventually brought forth into the progressive era. The final 2 days of this lesson will then be dedicated to my students having time to work on the essay, which will be assigned to them on day 9 of this lesson. In general, I feel that exams, especially in history courses, are hardly ever a good reflection of one's understanding of the subject. I personally would much rather assign an essay to my class. I would much rather my students be able to walk away with a good general understanding of this area of history and how it relates to others, and further be able to explain their thoughts through an essay rather than them memorizing specific dates and names like they would on a test or exam. I feel that writing an essay will be a much better way for me to really see how much each student understands this time frame, these events, and most importantly, the change that occurred through these events. In conclusion, I feel the biggest takeaway that my students will be able to gain from this lesson plan is gaining the ability to understand differences in the quality of life of this time period, and in return being able to tie this area of history in with other areas of history that they've already learned about and just sort of fill in the blanks between them. In this case, Reconstruction and the Progressive Era. Much like I said in my introduction, I strongly feel that this is an area of history that isn't talked about the way it should be, and I believe that this lesson plan could greatly benefit high schoolers.